I'm going to introduce our two speakers, so we'll just hold off there, although I'm not going to say too much about them because I'm sure most of you know them. But thanks for your attendance here today. It looks to be a great topic and a great audience for our first web-based meeting of the Green Bag Lunch. So we're going to talk about energy in New York State's energy plan. Our two speakers today will be Jessica Azulay, who is the Executive Director of the Alliance for a Green Economy, headquartered here in Syracuse, a statewide organization doing fantastic work. We've had Jessica speak several times before. An old bio that I found about her said she was a co-founder of People's Networks and the editor at the New Standard. She's a writer, an activist, an educator. She hails from West Virginia. She's an organizer in the anti-war and anti-capitalist globalization movement. So we're pleased to have Jessica with us today. And then she'll be followed by Chris Carrick. And Chris is employed at the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board as the Energy Program Manager. He's been in that capacity since 2008, unless he's received some kind of promotion that I don't know about, which is more than possible, I'm sure. Chris has joined the board of directors of GreeningUSA in 2012, and unfortunately went off in 2016. But so Chris has given great service, volunteer service to GreeningUSA over the years, and he has been a frequent speaker at Green Bag Lunch. So both of our speakers are going to have a presentation of maybe 15 to 20 minutes each. We'd like you to hold your questions until the end of both presentations, and then we'll open it up for a roundtable discussion with all of you. If you do have a burning issue that needs clarification, raise your hand, and if you get recognized, then you'll be allowed to speak. I want to point out to everybody that the room is mic'd. The mic is in the room is in the center of the room, that T-shaped device there. So you might want to be careful about what you say and how you act. We also are on camera, but mostly the camera will be facing this direction, either screen or on the podium. So without further ado, Jessica, it's all yours. Thank you.
So thank you so much for having me today. I think this topic is really important because we're going to talk about the New York State Energy Plan, plans for getting ourselves to 100% renewable energy. And it's timely because New York State should be coming out with an energy plan this year, and we'll be having an energy plan process. And so we can all be part of that. So I want to talk a little bit about that process near the end of my presentation. So just very quickly, a review of where we're at now, what we use energy for. I love this chart. It's a little outdated, so the amounts are a little bit different, although they haven't changed that much. And it's basically just a flow of where our energy comes from, our sources over here on the left. And then if you follow the lines, you can see what it's used for. So a bunch of things going to electricity generation, and then that electricity flows to the residential, commercial, and industrial sectors, and a little bit to transportation. You can see a lot of natural gas going straight into buildings, used for heat, water heating, etc. And then all this petroleum down here going, most of it to transportation for use in cars. And a pretty stunning thing that I find on this chart is all the way on the right, the two boxes, the larger one being rejected energy and the smaller one being energy services. So energy services is all the actually used energy that did something, and the rejected energy is the waste, the energy that resources used that didn't actually do anything. And you can see it's about 2/3 of the stuff that we use for energy getting wasted. And a lot of this stuff is dirty, right? So natural gas, coal, petroleum, nuclear, really dirty resources being used and wasted. So this is sort of the picture of where we're at today for New York, or where we were in 2014. It's changed a little bit. This is another way of looking at it. This is from 2016, specifically the trillion BTUs of energy from different sources. And this is consumption. Okay. Okay, thank you. So this is what we're using, you know, and you can see very starkly we're using a lot of natural gas. That's our biggest thing that we're using in New York. And this is for all kinds of energy, not just electricity. And then this is what we produce in New York. So all that natural gas that we use, not all of it, but nearly all of it comes from out of the state. So the environmental impact of that is externalized to the state. And most of what we produce is nuclear and other renewable energy, which includes hydro. So we're not making most of what we're actually using. And then in terms of the greenhouse gas impact of this, all of this, this is the percentage. Just a note that this does not include greenhouse gases from agriculture. So this isn't all the greenhouse gas emissions from the state, but this is just from energy. And agriculture is a big emitter of greenhouse gases. So as you can see, electricity is, which we talk about a lot, right? When we talk about renewable energy, a lot of times we think about electricity and we really focus on wind and solar, which is really important, but our greenhouse gases are largely coming from transportation, is the biggest, and then on-site combustion, which is the actual burning of things in our buildings, you know, for heating, for water heating, some industrial processes that use fossil fuels. So that's like burning stuff at home and at work. And that's the largest, you know, those two together, which we don't hear about and don't focus a lot, are, you know, a huge part of our greenhouse gas emissions problem in New York. So if we're talking about an energy plan, how we're going to reduce greenhouse gases, we really have to focus there as well. So just to talk about some basic pathways that a lot of people that have been looking at this and studying, you know, how are we going to get ourselves out of all this dirty energy and into a better future and hopefully save life on Earth. There are a few things, you know, there's a lot of detail, but there are a few basic things that they pretty much all agree on in terms of the strategy, the basic pathway. And this is not meant to be sequential. This is kind of needs to all happen at once since we're pretty much out of time. So it all kind of goes around. But basically, you know, making sure that we're reducing as much as possible the amount of energy that we actually need. So using our energy efficiently and turning stuff off. So energy efficiency and conservation to reduce what we need. In terms of how we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in transportation and heating, stop burning stuff in our car engines and in our homes and workplaces, the idea is electrify everything. So moving away from fossil fuel furnaces and fuel oil for heating and moving to heat pumps, geothermal and air source heat pumps, and that can run on efficient use of electricity, but get a lot of their energy from the environment in a renewable way. And this is a concept called beneficial electrification or environmentally beneficial electrification or strategic electrification. But the idea is if you can run those things on electricity, then you can provide that electricity with renewable energy like wind, solar, hydro, wave, etc. So that brings us to getting the grid, the electricity grid, to 100% renewable energy sources. And then in order to do that, because you know the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, we need to have some supporting things to support a 100% renewable energy grid, which is storage. And just a note that storage doesn't have to be batteries. There's lots of different ways to store energy. Pumped hydro, compressed air. There's lots of ways that we can store energy, including batteries. Demand response, which is essentially to to change when we need energy to respond to when we can produce it. So if the wind is blowing really hard or the sun is out shining, we could respond and try to use energy during that time. And then smart use is sort of along those same lines. So smart meters, smart grids, smart appliances, just really thinking about and changing storing energy and changing when we use energy in order to be flexible around a grid that relies on resources that are variable. So that's sort of the basic underpinnings of what people agree the strategy generally is. And then how this maybe fits together, just a illustration. This is just for the electricity sector. This was a study that was done by the Institute for Environmental and Energy Research. They're based in Maryland. This was done by Arjun Makhijani, their president, in Minnesota. And he was one of the first people to look at how would we actually, if we wanted to have 100% renewable energy on the grid, is it even really possible? So they looked at Minnesota. And they actually took real weather data and real measurements to see when does the sun shine and when does the wind blow and how much storage would we need and could we do this. So on the left there is a January week, so winter, and on the right is a July week, so summer. The yellow blobs are the sun coming up every day, very predictably. So you can see like when does the sun, when can we get solar energy? The green is wind, so it's a little bit less predictable, but very, very big resource. The red line is when there was actual demand for energy. The red is the overcapacity of the system. So the wind blew really hard and we had extra energy. So the red this is what we could put into storage. And then the purple is filling in from storage in between when the sun and the wind coupled together couldn't produce enough to meet demand. There's also a blue line, which is sort of a base load of hydro there. And so, they started to map out, like, how would we actually do this? And as you can see, there wasn't a huge amount of need for storage in comparison to, the resources that were there. And if they could have changed, when demand was happening to bring those demand curves down, they would have needed even less storage. So just kind of an illustration of how that 100% renewable energy grid could potentially work. And it does require us to think a little bit beyond baseload energy and rethink sort of how we think about resources. So right now we have a lot of things that we can control. The nuclear plants are pretty much always on except when they go down for maintenance or have an issue. Coal is pretty much always on. We can turn gas on kind of whenever we want. So system planners think about, okay, we have this base load of energy, a certain amount of energy that we will always be on. And then as demand grows, we kind of turn on more resources up until like the highest peaking stuff. And then when demand goes down, we shut stuff off and that's how we meet demand. If we have a system where we think about renewable energy as the base, right? We want to be using the sun and the wind whenever they're out and producing electricity. So our base becomes variable. And then we need other things that will fill in the gap that are very flexible that we can kind of control to fill in what our renewable energy is doing and our demand. And again, we could bring that demand curve down with demand response and smarter use of electricity. So, it's just it's kind of a flipped way of starting to think about, that 100% renewable energy grid. So what is the plan for New York to get there, to get to that, to pursue that strategy, electrify everything, get our grid to 100% renewables? And sadly, the answer is we don't really have one. We have an energy plan, but it doesn't really have a plan for that. What we have instead is we have some goals. So the last energy plan that came out in 2014 and was finalized in 2015 outlined, these are 2030 goals, a 40% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030 and 80% by 2050. By 2030, a 50% renewable energy electricity generation goal, and a 23% decrease in energy consumption in buildings by 2030. So they laid out some goals, and then we also have some policies. So we have reforming the energy vision, which is a policy to move us to a more distributed energy system, maybe away from more centralized generation toward distributed rooftop, community solar, etc. We have a new efficiency New York policy that set a goal of 185 trillion BTU of energy reductions in buildings by 2025 that just came out last year. We have the Clean Energy Standard, which mandates that utilities purchase 50% renewable energy by 2030. It also mandates that they spend $1.3 million on nuclear energy a day. It will add up to 7.6 billion over 12 years by 2029. So there's a lot of money going over to that dirty energy. We have an energy storage roadmap, which has a target of 1,500 megawatts by 2025. We have a renewable heating and cooling framework. So around that electrifying everything, NYSERDA has put some ideas together about how to do that. We have New York Sun, which is a program to support 3 gigawatts of distributed solar energy in New York by 2023 that the governor just announced he wants to double for 2025, I think. But we don't actually know how they're going to do that yet because that announcement just came out. And we have an electric vehicle goal of 800,000 zero-emission vehicles in New York by 2025. That's about 1 out of 10 vehicles by 2025. The efficiency goal, they say, will be about 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the equivalent of that. I haven't exactly seen how they calculate that. But those are sort of, those are the policies. But this is not clicking again. To me, this doesn't actually mean, this isn't really a plan. This is a bunch of policies that sort of work together, that have some goals, but it's not really clear how does each of these policies work together to get us to the goals. So for each of those policies that I mentioned, they don't have a sort of, this will take care of 20% of our 50% renewable energy grid goal, or this will take care of 30% of our, only for the efficiency one, that they have a percentage of our greenhouse gas reduction goal attached to it. So it's really hard to tell from this sort of, policy landscape, are we even on track? Even if we can meet all of these goals, would that even put us on track to get to the 40% greenhouse gas reduction goal by 2030? I don't think so. So from some of the numbers I've seen, but it's really unclear. And I just want to give one example of this failure of having a goal, or an example of failure that results from not having, goals but no real plan to get there. So Con Ed in Westchester, they're the utility, the gas and electricity utility in Westchester, just recently announced that it is going to disallow any new customers from signing up to many parts of its Westchester territory starting next month because its gas system is at capacity. And they would have to build a bunch more gas infrastructure in order to serve new customers. And people are freaking out about this because there's all kinds of new construction happening and people were expecting they were going to be able to get themselves on gas. Hey guys, and that was a nice little visit. I know those lovely people. People are freaking out about this, and they're saying, because this next month, March 15th, no more gas customers, and Con Ed hasn't really said how much more gas it would need in order to get rid of the moratorium. It's really unclear what the demand really is. And a lot of us see this as an opportunity. We're like, great, a moratorium on gas? Wonderful, let's move to heat pumps. We're supposed to stop burning stuff in our buildings, right? And all this new construction is going in. This is our moment to electrify everything. But there isn't really a plan for that. People in the area don't have the access to the information about what the alternatives are. The incentives are not high enough that going to a heat pump would be economically the same as being on gas. And so the utility, of course, is pushing for more gas infrastructure. And the Public Service Commission yesterday approved a portfolio that has thousands of heat pumps in it, which is great that the utility is going to give incentives for and help install, but also more gas storage and gas trucking to try to alleviate some of the constraints. And even then, they're saying that won't be enough to lift the moratorium on gas. And we don't really have, one of the commissioners was up there yesterday saying, like, we don't have a comprehensive energy plan. We don't even know what the need is here, and we don't really have a plan to address it, and people are asking for alternatives and people are freaking out. So, we need to deal with this stuff before it happens. And we need a plan and a strategy for really taking advantage of these opportunities when something reaches the end of the capacity of our current fossil fuel system, not building more fossil fuel infrastructure, because we know we're going to need to shrink that infrastructure over the next couple of decades. So it's just an example of why, not having a good plan gets us into a mess. So very quickly about the energy planning process. So it's supposed to happen every 4 years. Last time they were late. They were late in getting out a draft plan, and then they took a year to approve the plan, partly because there was so much activism around it over gas. And I think 40 to 50,000 comments were put in by the public, and they had to deal with them. But in theory, it's supposed to happen every 4 years. So the last one came out in 2015, so we would expect 2019 to be the year. There's an energy planning board. It's the head of all the state agencies, plus a representative from the Assembly and the Senate, and I believe the governor gets to put his own representative on there, even though all the heads of state agencies are his appointees. They start meeting. The meetings are public, like you can see the minutes and you can attend, although there's not necessarily an opportunity for testimony or something like that. They draft a plan. They release that draft plan for public comment and public hearings, and they hold public hearings across the state, and then there's a final plan. And a lot of us see this as, this is a big year. This is our moment to get ourselves out of the morass of these policies that maybe are going to get us there, maybe not, sort of hodgepodge, where are we going with this, into something that makes sense, that we can all see, like, how we're going to get there and participate in. And have state agencies pursue, but also have local communities pursue, and the public pursue in our own homes, to really, like, get ourselves to where we need to go. So we really think our work on this is actually before there's a draft plan, and that we really need to be organizing and starting to think in our own communities about what do we want in that energy plan? What do we want to advocate to the governor and the Energy Planning Board, NYSERDA, et cetera? What are the principles and the goals that we want to see in that plan? So there's a bunch of us that are starting to think about that. We're starting to think about pillars of this energy plan, what we want to see. I wrote a few of them of what we're thinking about on the slide. Obviously a roadmap to 100% renewable energy, but also, the transformation of our energy system is the transformation of our economy. And so we have an opportunity, as we're transforming our energy system, to really think big about where do we want to be as a society in 2030, and how can we use this energy transformation to help us get there. So we hope you will join us in that process as we kind of go from community to community and have these conversations and come up with a people's energy plan, a people's energy platform to bring to the state to get them to do this better this year. So thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak. It's great to see so many friendly faces here. I kind of think of this as my annual salon, like they used to have back in Paris in the day. A friendly crowd where we can share some free exchange of ideas. And hopefully I won't alienate too many of you because I expect I may say some things that are unpopular with maybe everybody at one point or another. But I do want to make it clear to start that I'm not speaking for the Regional Planning and Development Board today. I'm just speaking for myself. So the comments you see, although I'll draw on information from my work, the fault lies with me. Let's put it that way. Okay. There we go. So I just wanted to really quickly, I know everyone in the room knows this, but I'm a believer in preaching to the choir because I think we need to raise our voices so that the rest of the world can hear. So in terms of what we face, we all know we're in a critical moment, right? We have 12 years left to really bend the curve on our carbon emissions, according to the IPCC report. Then the National Climate Assessment came out with a whole bunch of more disturbing information. I mean, it's pretty clear that this is an urgent crisis that we face. It's not a crisis for 2030. It's not a crisis for 2050 or even 2100, certainly. So we're already dealing with this, right? This is information from NOAA about weather-related disasters that incur a cost of $1 billion or more. You can see 2018 is shown in red. This is only through September, so this does not show Hurricane Florence, which was one of the top 10 costliest disasters in U.S. history, or the Camp Fire, which was the deadliest wildfire in U.S. history. So clearly, we're at a tipping point, beyond a tipping point, who knows? We can't say for sure. But certainly every week brings more disturbing information, if you're following this like I am, right? Antarctica's ice loss has sextupled since the 70s. More holes we're finding every, month in Antarctica. Here's the tipping point in Greenland that we're worried about, right? Carbon emissions last year went the wrong way. We went up after a couple years of kind of declining or leveling off. But what really disturbs me the most is that the information we're getting now is showing us that the predictions from even 5 years ago are wrong. They're too conservative, right? So Antarctica's ice sheet melting 3 times faster than we thought, ocean warming accelerating faster than we thought, climate change driving species out of their habitat faster than we thought. It's upsetting. If you're not upset, you're not paying attention. Now, the good news, maybe, is that the public seems to be getting it. I don't know if it's the disasters or what. This is from Meet the Press. Some of you may saw. We were glad to see they focused on this issue. Of course, they did it right after Christmas, before New Year's, when no one was watching. That's upsetting. But public opinion seems to be turning around. 70% believe it's happening. 57% believe it's caused by humans. I wish that was higher, but I'll take it. More believe that it's a serious problem and needs human action. Look at the point swing since 1999, a 30-point swing. Beliefs about climate change are remarkably consistent across ethnic groups, even across community types, urban, suburban, rural, a little bit lower in rural areas. But the real problem is, of course, ideology, right? With Republicans, no change in belief that this is a serious problem that needs action. And then when you survey people, are you willing to pay? If you were in graduate school, maybe you did one of these kinds of studies. What are people willing to pay to save a beach or save a butterfly or save the world? Are they willing to pay $10 a month? Maybe. What's the world worth to us? And so, what are the barriers? I think we know what they are. It's special interests, it's incumbent market actors, it's the free rider and collective action problem, it's sunk costs, it's inertia in our policy making, it's an intergenerational problem. But part of it, I think, is that it's invisible to us on a daily basis, the carbon emissions. It's not like the Cuyahoga River or the Santa Barbara oil spill that kicked off Earth Day and the modern environmental movement. We don't see it. This is the daily emissions from New York City. 54 million metric tons per year, 148,000 tons per day. So the global emissions, you'd multiply this pile up to the Empire State Building times 650. That would be the daily emissions per day. So what's it going to take for people to turn around? Maybe it's because our coffee is going to go away and our chocolate. Maybe it's bananas or maple syrup. As Bill Maher said on his last show, we're one item away from losing the Grand Slam at Denny's. Maybe it's the beer and the wine that's going to go away. Maybe that will get people's attention. Well, we're certainly in a pickle. And this is where we stand right now. Jessica's covered some of this, so I won't linger on it too much. But the point here is most of our emissions in central New York and statewide come from burning energy. So we really need to make this energy transition that Jessica sketched out so well. You know, I often run into this question of, well, you know, this is the free rider problem. We're just a tiny little region. What can we do? You know, what can I do? What can the state do? What can the country do? China and India are going to do what they want. So we might as well just see the world burn, right? That's what Trump basically has said. Well, this shows our annual emissions in central New York in metric tons compared to New York State. So we're a little less than 5% of the state, less than, you know, 0.2% of the country, 0.03% of the world. Right? New York State is less than 4% of the country, less than 0.6 of the world. The US is 15.5% of the world. So the question is, what percentage of responsibility is enough to make us wake up and take action? We all have to take action. Every region has to go through this. Every state has to go through this. I think New York State has, despite all the problems that Jessica laid out so well, has the potential to be a leader. Certainly Cuomo wants to be a leader. He set this 100% renewable energy goal by 2040 because he wanted to beat California by 5 years. My point, though, is that's a distraction to some degree. It's important. As Jessica said, it's just one piece of the puzzle, though. Okay? It distracts us from building, heating, and cooling. It distracts us from transportation. It's a nice buzzword that gets a headline in the paper, but if there's no plan to actually get there, we're not really doing what we need to do. So here's central New York, our region. You can see how much installed capacity we have, 6,200 megawatts. We're an energy exporting region. We produce 4 times more than we use in central New York because of the nuclear plants. You can see what actually runs, 82% nuclear, 14.5% natural gas, 3.5% renewable. This is just a snapshot I like. Of our energy producing assets in the region. So you can see the nuclear plants up there in Oswego, the big Safe natural gas plant, that big hulking NRG oil-fired plant that runs on the peaking days that is so expensive to run. Running those peaking plants costs the state $2 billion a year. So when you start talking about, oh, solar's so expensive and we need subsidies and all of this, these are subsidized. Those nukes are subsidized on orders of magnitude more than solar and wind are being subsidized. So don't let your weird uncle tell you on Facebook that solar doesn't work because it needs subsidies. These are being subsidized. We've got a few hydro plants on the Oswego River, Wasco River, minimal, maybe 100 megawatts. A couple waste to energy plants, 50 megawatts, 75 megawatts of wind. Minimal digesters going on our farms. Jessica talked about agriculture. Well, here's a comparison of New York State versus downstate versus upstate versus CNY in what's actually generating electricity, right? So you can see central New York, we're behind the curve here. We're 3.5% renewable versus the state figure, which is 28%. But look, most of that's coming from hydro. That's legacy stuff. We can't take credit for that. We're coasting on that. We barely moved the needle on solar and wind in the last 5 years. It's embarrassing. We should all be embarrassed. So I'm turning to consumption. You know, this is coming from our regional plan. We're looking at metric tons per person. This is all per capita stuff, electricity use, and then natural gas use. So I thought this is kind of instructive just to show what different community types, energy mix, energy footprint looks like. So you can see the average for the region in black on the top. If figures are in green, it's better than the average. If it's in red, it's higher than the average. Now, I don't show this to wag my finger at DeWitt for having higher per capita metric tons. They have a lot of industry in DeWitt, as Sam would be happy to tell you, and that's causing a lot of that, right? So, you know, look at Preble, poor little Preble. It's a farming community. They have more cows than people. So that goes to the agriculture issue, right? So it's just getting to that issue of planning. I think you need to have regional planning, a state plan, then empower the regions to do regional planning to try to work with communities in ways that make sense for them. A bottom-up approach is what I would like to see. So where are we? It's pretty sad. These are some figures. Passenger vehicles, almost 500,000, maybe 500 plug-in electrics and batteries. 234 single-family houses. Dick, you could tell us all, maybe 20,000 have been weatherized through home performance. Maybe 2,100 solar PV projects. Maybe 50 LEED certified buildings. Not saying LEED is the end-all be-all, but it's a measure of energy efficiency out of 14,000 commercial buildings and 8 digesters out of 568 dairy farms. So you tell me, how much work do we have to do? So where do we need to go? We've done a pretty decent job bending the curve on electricity, decarbonizing electricity. That's that grayish line. You can see the steep, or the yellowish line, orange, steep curve there. In buildings, we've done okay. We've done nothing on transportation, the blue line, it's going up, right? So we've done the easier stuff, and it's easy to point at a power plant and all point our fingers and say, you're bad. Let's close that down, but it's really gonna take a comprehensive systematic effort. So yes, electrify everything, cars, buses, trucks. We could electrify planes. There's research being done on that. Power it all with clean renewable sources and reduce our consumption and demand. That's really the key. And I know, again, this is preaching to the choir, and I've been in this space for 10 years, and every meeting I go to, people say we got to focus on efficiency. And it's like saying the Lord's Prayer in church. Do you really hear it? Do you really think about it? Or saying the Pledge of Allegiance at school, right? You're not really absorbing it, but I've been doing a lot of research, partly to prepare for this, and believe me, we can't get there without it. So this is a vision of where we need to be that I poached from the Renewable Heat Now folks. And I like it because it's simple and it shows at that ground level, what does it look like? What do we need, right? So we need renewable energy, solar or wind. We need electric cars. We need heat pump, geothermal in this case, could be air source heat pumps. The good news is that we can do this. The technology is there. We know how to do it. It's a matter of political will and putting the resources together. Can we move this?
Yeah. Go up to the right. Yeah, up there. No, don't do that.
I don't want to do it. I'm just going to move it over.
There you go.
There we go. I really hope no one from my service listening. Okay. So this is from our regional plan. This is a waterfall chart to show, based on our estimates 5 years ago, where our reductions could come. Again, look at transportation. It's the hugest slice, right? And we're doing almost nothing about it. Oh, now I've lost this. Cursed. We're cursed. Okay. All right. How much time do I have? Maybe. All right.
You're doing good. I mean, it's kind of.
Okay. So this is information that was put together for the EPA. It shows 3 basic housing types: single family, detached, attached, and then multifamily. It compares conventional suburban development in gray versus transit-oriented development. And the point here is to show, well, no matter what technology you use, an electric car, whatever, heat pump, if we're living in smart growth communities, you're going to be better off than living in the suburbs, right? So I know Sam likes that message. Planners like that message. No one else likes that message because, our settlement patterns are really hard to change and take a long time, right? We like our big houses in the country. Urban renewal destroyed our cities, Syracuse, Auburn. Our infrastructure is really hard to change, as I know we all know. Hopefully we'll go to CATCO's meeting on Saturday. So are our attitudes and habits, right? So this is information I put together, just a thought experiment. Okay, this is not coming out of much informed planning. It's kind of back of the envelope. But what I did was I took existing renewable energy sources and then in red showed some potential new renewable energy resources. So I have the megawatts listed here, right? Has some detail on how many solar farms and so forth it would take, and then how much energy that would produce, and then the total here, over 3 million megawatt hours, okay? This is hard to read because of this stupid thing. Okay, so here's where the efficiency argument becomes super important, right? So here's our annual consumption in 2013, 6.2 million megawatt hours. If we cut that by 20%, our share of renewable energy jumps from 49% to 61%. If we cut it by 40%, all of a sudden 82% of our needs are met by renewables. If we cut by 60%, wow, we're making more renewables than we need, which is good because we might have to curtail some wind and solar. There are storage options, but we might have to curtail. But now look at the converse. If we electrify everything, then our growth grows, our consumption grows. So if we grow by 20%, now we're down to 41% renewable. If we grow by 40%, 35%, and so forth. We don't know exactly because we don't have a good plan. If we electrified all the single passenger vehicles and all the people on propane and fuel oil, what would that do? We have no clue. And I'll tell you, National Grid has no clue. But we need to get a clue, and we need to get it fast. If you can tell, I'm a little exercised by this all day. Just because we should have done this 10 years ago, right? So can we get there? Yes, we can. This is the variability issue that Jessica was talking about. I really hate this box. I'm going to put it over here. Okay. So all these different sources have different capacity factors, which just shows how often they run during the year, right? So nuclear in yellow runs the most, solar in orange runs the least, and everyone says, well, we can't run on renewables because solar doesn't have the capacity. There's all sorts of flexibility resources, and Jessica talked about them. I won't go into them in detail, but would love to talk to you. I've been reading dozens of papers about this in the last couple of weeks. We can handle this, believe me. And there's lots of studies. Jessica mentioned one of the first that was done in 2007. Lots of people know about the Mark Jacobson and Cornell study, the Solutions Project people who talk about 100% wind, water, and solar. Well, these are just some other studies that show, you know, all the chicken little predictions of the utilities and others, the incumbents, are not going to come to pass. So we could 80% renewable energy by 2050. We need storage equal to 11%. That's what NREL said in 2012. Rocky Mountain Institute came out the same year and said, no, it's really half that, 5%. NREL said, well, 80% would not really raise retail rates. The International Energy Agency, one of the most conservative institutions in the world, said the grid balancing costs for 20 to 30% wind are pretty low, and so forth and so on. Now there's naysayers out there. This is one study that ran a model for the UK that said if we go to 77% solar and wind, we might have to curtail or shed 30% or a third roughly, and we might have 8% unmet demand. But they did not factor in demand side management into their model, which is a huge oversight, right? Because that's one of the key strategies that we need. So there's lots of problems with energy modeling. They always account for distributed energy. They don't count environmental impacts or social benefits. They always use outdated data. They don't predict what the emerging technologies will be. They don't account for learning effects, which Amory Lovins from Rocky Mountain Institute talks about. The more we do something, the better we get at it. I'm sure the architects in the room could speak to that. Most fundamentally, it's built on the assumptions of the old centralized grid. Okay, so Amory Lovins says, the conservative climate models, you know, I started this talk, with that underplayed the speed and the runaway effects, the feedback loops, but they also underestimate how practical and profitable it could be to fix the problem. So I'm not here to say models are bad, don't believe in models, you know, fake news. I'm here to say the models are too conservative. And a study that was just done showed that 71% of the modelers believe 100% is renewable is possible, against what their models say. So they know there's all these layers of embedded assumptions in their models that they just don't have the time or whatever to unpack. So is it possible? Well, we're seeing it, right? This is just a snapshot of where different states or countries are. So the year, I got the data, the percent renewable, which includes hydro, and then the percent without hydro. So I've ordered this by the last column. So you see we're at the lowest, right? 5%. Again, we barely moved the needle on solar and wind. All the way up to Denmark, which is over half, and that's today. Okay, so yeah, they import some hydro from Sweden and Norway, but there's solutions out there and it's being done and we need to do more. So can we get there? Yes, probably. I'll say probably, but we don't need 100% certainty, right? Did we launch the moonshot with 100% certainty? No. Not the best analogy in my opinion. I think this is more akin to building out the Continental Railroad or the federal highway system, but you know, we didn't know when we started. So what will it take? So this is where I'm going to get into trouble. We're in a position right now in the state where we have this magical market thinking, where we think the private sector all of a sudden is going to come in and rush in and with all these resources that the state doesn't want to spend. It's yet to be seen. It's yet to be proven anywhere. And the problem with it is the same problem as the 30% federal tax credit for renewable energy. We're in the business now of begging Wall Street to come invest in our energy future. They're not doing it for free. The utilities already get an 8% guaranteed profit on everything they invest in. Now you want to invite Citibank, Bank of America, the largest insurance companies who want a 10, 11, 12% return. That's money that should be going into the system, in my opinion. So I think, you know, we need stronger public policy. I'm talking about bans. I'm talking about mandates, right? We're talking about what other countries are doing. No more electric cars after this date, period. That's what we need to do. We need public spending, no gasoline cars. Public spending, we need to spend money. We cannot expect, as the state policymakers will tell you, that we can get a cleaner, more resilient, more robust energy system on the cheap. We're cheaper than what we spend now. It's just not going to happen. And we're deluding ourselves if we think so. I know there's a lot of folks who are concerned about the poor, and that's a big issue. We got to protect the most vulnerable, but we're going to need to spend more. We need more public lending. We need a real green bank, in my opinion. We need more public, stronger regulation of energy markets, things like progressive tariffs. So why should that 5,000, 10,000 square foot home pay the same rate per kilowatt hour as someone in Syracuse who's barely getting by? They should pay more. They're using more. They should pay more. Public ownership of power utilities. Again, they get an 8% guaranteed return. But then you ask them, well, can we have consolidated billing so that community solar developers can work with you to bill your customers and get credits on their bill? Oh, we can't pay for that. No, sorry. Where's that going to come from? Well, you know, maybe we should just take control of the public utilities. We certainly need more public planning, and you know, I'm a planner, so that's my bias. But we need that nesting of state, regional, and community planning. We need smart, holistic planning. We need bottom-up planning with enforceable metrics. Right now, the state energy plan is a hodgepodge, as Jessica said, a wish list of policies that don't really work together or add up. And we don't know how we're making progress. So we need to move in that direction. So takeaways, yes, variability is an issue, but don't use it as an excuse. And don't get so fixated on the 100%. You know, I know that was the frame of the talk, but you know, let's get to 60% and then reevaluate. 60% would be a huge jump. And we know we can do that today. So don't get baited into this. You know, we're seeing it now with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? And her federal Green New Deal, which is 2030, 100%. You know, I just put that aside. That's noise. Let's just get to work. We do have to be aware of natural gas lock-in because that's the cheap, easy way to do this base load. It ramps up quickly. But if we start building a whole fleet of natural gas plants, in 20 years when we need to get beyond 60%, it's going to be really hard. And then who's going to retire all that? We're going to have all these stranded assets. So we need to put moratoriums on, whether we backed into it by mistake, like Con Ed or whatever. Let's jump on this moment because we really need to make sure gas is not a bridge, it's a barrier, it's a wall. I do think we need to keep nukes now, at least for the time being. I don't like the way they're being subsidized at all. You know, the state put $900 million into solar over 5 years. They're putting, what is it? 7.6 billion over 12 years into nukes. And that's a conservative estimate, I think. So, I mean, our priorities are out of whack. When you look at per megawatt hour, what we're spending on nukes versus solar and wind, it's orders of magnitude disproportionate. So, in this immediate transition, I think we do need to probably keep them open. We're not going to close them tomorrow, for sure. Sorry, Jessica. We do need relentless with discussion time. Yes, relentless R&D, but not only in technology. It's not the latest and greatest. I mean, I love the molten metal batteries coming out of MIT as much as the next energy nerd. But we can do more with hot water pumps and electric vehicles and space heating. When the sun is going and the wind, heat up everyone's hot water tanks for later. Distributed storage can do a lot. And that unwavering focus on efficiency. So I'm going to wound down here. Why efficiency? It's the cheapest and largest resource we've got. It can be done more quickly. It helps get more renewables on the grid, as I showed you in that table. We can't meet 1.5 degrees without it. We just can't. No climate modeler will tell you that. So that we can meet it without efficiency. And I'm talking radical efficiency, like again, 20, 40, 60% efficiency. So this is the same chart Jessica showed, just highlighting again, 2/3 wasted, right? Look at the waste in transportation, 80%. Tell me gas cars aren't subsidized. And they want to hit us with fees for buying electric vehicles, right? So where are we going? We keep increasing our targets, 50 to 70%, to 100%, to 1,000 million %. It's just noise to me. I'm going to skip through this stuff. I've been comparing the Green New Deal that Cuomo announced with the Climate and Community Protection Act, with the Off Fossil Fuels Act, and all these different metrics. Happy to talk more about that. I don't want to take any more time now, but I will show, what I like about the CCPA, it's got the carbon fee in it. It's the only path we have now that's actually planted a flag in the ground and said, we need money. That's going to raise $7.5 billion a year. Right now, through the Clean Energy Fund, we're committed to $5 billion over, 10 years. I mean, it's pathetic, right? We're ramping down on rebates. Richard Kaufman, the outgoing energy czar, said rebates don't work. He's a Wall Street guy. Now, I just want to end on this, because this is a great example, like the Con Ed example, of policy failure. And you got to get the details right. So here's growth in solar in New York State. You can see it's growing. It was growing really nicely here, but this is the yearly. You can see we're stalling out over here, right? It's even worse when you look at central New York. Look at this big drop from 2017 to 2018 in solar. This is because the net metering policy is all messed up. I mean, they really messed this up. So this value of distributed energy resources, some of you know I've been working on this with Jessica and others for a while now, but it's destroyed community solar in central New York. We have to fix this. So you, again, can have all the grand pronouncements, all the targets and goals you want, but if your policy doesn't work and doesn't fit together with beneficial electrification and everything else, you're going backwards. So that's it. Hopefully I didn't mess up too much. Look forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's open it up to your questions now. I can let Chris and Jessica recognize questioners, or I can intercede if you need me. I don't think we can. We can pull some chairs up here if you prefer that. Here, sure. I got an empty one here, Chris. You don't have to move in.
I want to take Dave's question because he enrolled for Heat Smart CNY.
Yeah, you only get your question answered if you fill out an enrollment for Heat Smart.
Exactly.
So,
Do we have cards on for?
I don't have cards, but I have a sign-up sheet.
Okay. Good.
Oh, okay, Dave Asher here. The auto show is on right now, but if you look online, you can find sites that will give you a list of electric cars and plug-in hybrids that will get. There's about 30 plug-in hybrids, but there's only about 15 that will get over 20 miles on a charge. There's no excuse for anybody buying a gasoline car anymore, because they're subsidized with $7,000 for the electric and maybe 3 to 5 on the plug-in. things. So there's no excuse for that. And the other thing I'm doing, which Chris is involved in, I'm getting a price right now for geothermal or for maybe either ground source or air source. But basically, it's going to cost, the cost is around $26,000 when the subsidy is around, so it gets down to about 15. It's not going to pay for itself. The only way it's going to pay for itself is if we get like a citizens climate lobby where the price for fossil fuels keep going up and up and up. But then when it gets to the point where it's up high enough, we're going to look around and we're going to say, well, gee, it's cheaper to put in the, you know, the ground source or air source heat pumps.
So I didn't hear a question in there, but I'm going to take a moment to just plug the Heat Smart CNY campaign because you brought it up. So AGREE and the planning board are partnered together. If you haven't heard about it yet, we're doing a campaign called Heat Smart CNY. This is to help people electrify their heating, hot water heating and space heating in all of central New York. We are working with partner geothermal and air source heat pump installers who will come to your house. They will assess you for energy efficiency. They will figure out how to get you into a heat pump. They will give you a quote. And this is a community campaign. We have a steering committee of community volunteers who helped us vet these installers and chose who to work with. And we're doing workshops all over the place. So please, there's a website. Thank you. heatsmartcny.org. And Andra has cards back there. We have the AGREE sign-up sheet here. You know, if you want to help, if you want to get on our email list, you can sign up there and we'll send you to the website. You can enroll on the website. You can enroll at a workshop. You can enroll at an open house. But, you know, this is part of the strategy, electrifying everything. And we're going to be doing this for the next couple of years, and we're so excited to be bringing this to Central New York. Any other questions? William, Pete? I don't know who was first.
William Sunderland. I want to just begin by strongly endorsing, Chris, your points about having a stronger orientation towards regulation. I feel that that's unavoidable to make progress. And I'm wondering if we don't need also a stronger orientation towards working with national organizations in order to have that happen better, and possibly connecting with the Green New Deal. Even though that's very amorphous right now and still in the planning stages, I'd be interested to know your perspective on that.
Now, if you do speak up, that microphone is supposed to pick up on this. It's not working.
Yeah. So use the handheld for questions.
So I agree completely. One of the issues is that utility markets are regulated at the state level. So each state has its own public service commission or public utility commission. And so that's where a lot of the action takes place in terms of regulation. You know, when I talk about bans, I'm talking about things like what New York City did, banning dirty fuel oil, number 4 fuel oil. A lot of people groused about that. They were not happy, but, you know, I think, you know, we're going to reach the point, if we haven't already, where we have to ban new natural gas and new, you know, oil furnaces, period. Now, I've heard that raises Federal Trade Commission rules and such. That there might be federal preemption, so that might be a place where federal action could help. But I'm a big believer in the carbon fee or carbon fee and dividend, whatever flavor of carbon fee you want. I think that should be done on the national level, but if we can't get that, and we probably can't right now, let's do it at the state level and see where it goes, right? We have RGGI, which puts a minimal fee on power generation, but that's just one sector, as we've been saying. The carbon fee would be economy-wide, and that's where we need to be.
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of different strategies for getting, the new technology in and the bad old dirty technology out, and regulation, appliance standards, building codes, stopping gas infrastructure, basically saying like we're done with this technology, is one really key strategy. Because one of the other strategies, of course, is taxing the bad stuff, and another is incentivizing the good stuff. And we probably need all of it. But I saw a study on refrigerator appliance standards once that Arjun Makajani just showed like a chart one time, and it was astounding because you always think, they were basically mandating an appliance standard, more and more efficient refrigerators. And what that showed is the cost of the refrigerators actually came down, even while the appliances were being, mandated to be more efficient. And that is incredible, right? So I think you're right, like we really do need to look at that. And in terms of the Green New Deal, I think what we're seeing with all the excitement around that is the thing that Chris was talking about in his presentation. People are freaking out. People are realizing we're in a crisis. The timeline is short enough that we understand it, right? It used to be, we were kind of thinking about like 2050, you had to like calculate, how old will I be in 2050? Will I even be alive? Like, how old will my kids be? But now we're talking about 12 years, and a lot of us can think 12 years ahead. And so there's a lot of, I think people are looking for solutions, and they're looking to think big, and they're looking to think about, a greater transformation, not just of the electricity system, but of the economy. And I think we should, locally think about that and hook into the energy and get ourselves organized as the state comes up with its energy plan this year.
Yeah, I think Peter had a question back there. I'm going to ask one here just to get a placeholder. I'd like you to explain what the process is going to be by the state going forward. Like, who will be in control of this, and what will they do, and when will they do it?
Peter Worth. My question is, do we need to talk about higher energy prices, which I realize is like the third rail? And the reason I ask that is, I have a high efficiency gas furnace in my house. I've started to get some quotes for air source heat pumps. The reality is I will pay more than my existing gas furnace. And then basically with my utility bill, while I'll see the gas side go down, I'll see the electric bill go up. So there's no way I can justify or sell to my neighbors, doing what I'm doing.
Well, how much is the world worth?
If you're a salesman, just sell units, try that approach.
Well,
I haven't been able to sell my neighbors on saying spend more.
Yeah.
So I think what you're pointing out is that our markets aren't working.
Energy is too cheap.
But that's because our pricing mechanisms and our markets are wrong, right? So all the environmental harm that we're doing with our current energy is not included in the price. And all the good that we could be doing with the clean stuff is not included in the incentives. And this is part of energy planning, right? If we're going to make a system transformation, whether it's going to be market-based or not, like, we have to get a hold of those externalities and charge for them or incorporate them in our benefit cost analysis and what we're investing in. And our system doesn't do that right now, but there is a battleground over this right now. In the utility rate cases, a lot of us have been fighting for better cost benefit analyses because they're making these investments in gas infrastructure because people want gas, it's cheap. But what's not cheap is building the pipeline to the person's house, connecting the new construction or the person who's now on a new pipeline. And all of that is currently subsidized by ratepayers, and all the methane emissions and all the environmental harm is not included in the price. But then when you compare that to the heat pump and the incentives are so anemic and you have to pay for that heat pump out of your own pocket, it's just like completely whack. So why aren't we using ratepayer money to pay for heat pumps instead of gas infrastructure? That's a battleground that's happening right now. And we need more public pressure on the governor and the Public Service Commission and the utilities to bring them around to getting sane with this stuff.
So another example of that that folks I don't think really understand is the transmission network, electricity transmission, high voltage. We have 11,000 miles of that in the state. Most of it's built in the 80s. The NISO, Independent System Operators, estimated we need to spend $30 billion just to maintain what we have. That gets spread around not just to if the line is in your zone, that's allocated to everyone in the state, right? Why do we need so much high voltage transmission? Because New York City, Westchester, and Long Island consume 60% of the energy, but only produce 40%. So we got to truck all that hydro and nuclear downstate, and it's really expensive. We lose a lot of energy along the way. So, you know, it's not just the $2 billion we spend in peaker plants that we probably don't need. It's all this transmission that we're bearing the cost for. I've been thinking more about making an analogy to health insurance lately, right? So it's like Medicare for all. We know that we could run the health insurance system much more cheaply because we're doing it with the VA and Medicare than the private insurance companies who get huge CEO bonuses and spend tons of money on advertising and all the rest of it. Like I said, the utilities get an 8% guaranteed profit. Let's take that back and let's invest it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. I mean, that would be kind of a follow-up to like what you said is, you know, you said there's some battlegrounds, and I wonder how that battle is going to play out. Somebody had the hand up back here.
Yeah, hello, I'm Ted Andreni from ESF. So I have a tree-based question. It stems from, pun intended, one of your last slides where do we go from here? And you spoke about the efficiency being the area that you want to elaborate on. I'm curious, does that include demand management? And I see that as being something that is tree-based. In your earlier cartoon where you had a schematic of a perfect situation of the house with the PV and the wind, you could have more shading. So we know tree shade does seriously reduce the energy demand for cooling. There are some offsets with heating. We also know that we should look, as you mentioned, the markets. And so where does our region fit in with these markets? If we are planting more forests in order to sequester, and then we have industry that's leading the way with incorporating wood into buildings, which we know can now go into high rises. You have a 60-meter structure going up in Norway. You have taller ones being designed elsewhere. We know the efficiencies of these buildings with wood products are much higher. I think that we have regional incentives to be a showcase for how do you use forests to cool cities, to reduce the cooling load on buildings, and then how do you use this wood in order to start working a market where we can be getting credits. So I saw your efficiencies, but I'm curious if you could elaborate on where you see demand management going into those efficiencies.
Thank you.
I'll start. It's a huge piece of the puzzle, and there's lots of studies that show that. You know, we need to match when we need the energy with when the energy is being produced, as Jessica's chart showed so well, I think. You're touching on some other things that I think are really important, which is the principle of integrative design that Emery Lovins talks about, right? So it's thinking holistically about a system, whether it's a house, a neighborhood, a city, a region. So for example, you know, if we lighten our cars, we need less drivetrain and fewer batteries. So you can pay for the additional cost of composite materials with saving money on the battery. That's one example. Lots of money is spent on motors in industry. Half of electricity goes to industry. Most of that goes to motors for ducts, fans, and pumps. If we straighten out our pipes and reduce friction by 80%, you can afford less motor, less electricity. So these are the kinds of integrative design principles that I'm sure the architects in the room could talk more cogently about. So the idea of, how do we look at neighborhood planning, not just trees, but the smart growth issues that I talked about to lower that demand. We're not doing any of that.
If I can quickly throw something out, you had a what-if slide where you were forecasting out to 2030 reductions of 20, 40, 60% energy use. Were you envisioning efficiencies when you were hitting each one of those reductions in your spreadsheet? Were you saying, oh, if we had increased, let's say, insulation in the homes that Dick would be able to tell us about, or
Right.
more PHEV vehicles on the road? Are those 20, 40, 60% reductions something that we can hit with what you're discussing?
We, in our regional plan, did some analysis of that because we set a target of 40%. But, the state gave us a year. They gave us a lot of money to make the plan, but they gave us a year to do it. So we didn't have the time to really get into that kind of detailed analysis, I'm sad to say. What I was showing here is just a thought experiment, just to show the balance between efficiency and what renewables can do and how important it is to meet those. But there's no detail in there, unfortunately.
Dick Kornbluth, I am glad to see, Jessica, that you and your allies are working on the benefit cost analysis, because that was the bane of my existence as a home performance contractor for 10 years.
I've taken up the torch.
Thank you. So my question has to do with, there's a political component to this. Okay, so what we can't get through from the governor by the governor's will and decision making, we can get done by the political process and legislation. And I'm glad to see that you put the CCPA up on the screen. So I think that the population, the people in the state, need to push really hard to support getting legislation like that through, so that the will of the people gets expressed, and the demands of the people get expressed for change. So I don't have a great faith in the Public Service Commission or in the governor's office. I know that heaps of scorn have been piled onto NYSERDA for the way they run programs, but they are also, in a sense, victims because they have to answer to the PSC. So it's really, we really have to do the political act.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are a few other questions here. We're getting close to the end of our time, so this may need to be our last one, and it probably is a good segue to tell us the process, what's going to happen, and what do we need to do.
So on the political will, yes, like we're in the midst of the legislative session, right? And it only goes through June in New York. So we have a moment to try to push some big legislation. AGREE is a member of New York Renews, which is pushing the Community Climate and Protection Act, the CCPA, and hopes to introduce the CCIA, which is the Community Climate Investment Act, which would basically make polluters pay and take that money and put it toward an equitable transition to 100% renewable energy. I think so. I think I have two thoughts on the how we as a community could think about the political piece and our ability to pressure it. So I was really impressed with hearing all the expertise that's in this room today. And there's about 30 of us here. 30 of us can fill the Public Service Commission chamber. 30 of us can be an overflowing crowd outside an elected official, inside and out into the hallway, an elected official's office. So, we don't need to talk about where are all the people, we need more people. We have enough people in this room to cause a real big stink. And we have the brains in this room to ask the really hard questions and start creating answers. We don't have, necessarily a representative crowd in this room in terms of the needs of the city of Syracuse. So I wouldn't say like we could all come up with a plan together and it would be the plan. But there's incredible intelligence in this room that if we brought some more people into that process, we could come up with an energy plan and really work to carry it out for our region, and we could make a demand on the state about what we need in the state's energy plan to enable us to do that locally. So let's do it. Sign up for Alliance for a Green Economy. We will contact you. Like we have what we need here in this room. Let's make it happen. In terms of the energy planning process, we don't know when they're going to start. We keep hearing different things. Maybe third quarter of this year, maybe next year. They're already maybe thinking about it being late. But we don't need to wait for them, because by the time they have, the heads of state agencies in the room, it's the heads of state agencies, NYSERDA, and a couple of representatives from the legislature that will make that plan. Those are not the right people to make the plan. No shade on them. Like, they're very smart people, but they need public pressure, they need public involvement, and they need to be, I think, going around to the state and hearing what people want to do locally, what they're already doing locally, and what the needs are. I don't expect them to do that, so we're going to do it for them. So we're starting now a process of coming up with that people's energy plan demand, so that when they start their process, we've already given them a bunch of stuff. But their process will be, they'll start meeting, they'll start, publishing meeting notes, and then they'll come up with a draft plan. Then there will be public comment and public hearings. But by that time, they've already written something. They haven't necessarily taken stuff into account unless we tell them and kind of make them. And then they, look at the comments, and maybe they incorporate them and they come up with the final plan. So that's the process. Not sure when it will start, but we're starting now.
I would just add, it's not a matter of either or, it's both and. We should be engaging right now about the CCPA, or whatever emerges out of this amalgam of AUFA and CCPA and whatever.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's a great place to end this meeting. Give a big hand to our panelists today. This was a great way to kick off our web